Hey, it's Firewalker, here to give you an abridged account of my recent experience going to listen to a lecture by Lee Strobel, very famous author in the Christian community for his book, Case for Christ. I heard about him a lot when I was in high school, which is a private Christian school, and I think we were supposed to read it in the 8th or ninth grade. I don't know if it was assigned or just recommended reading. In any case, I didn't get past page 33. So going to the lecture was a pretty good thing for me. I wanted to just go in with an open mind, and I didn't want to become too group polarized towards the atheist side and continue to listen to evidences brought up, etc., which is why I chose to go. When I say he's famous, I mean that there were over 1,000 people there that one night to listen to him speak. And that's really just the beginning of his fame. So some of you may be familiar with him, others may not. Either way, just know that he's very well known in the Christian community. If you want to see the full account of my experiences, the points that he made, my thoughts and feelings on several things that happened, reactions, responses, etc., you can go to my blog, which the link is for in the description. I will also go over a couple of more things that happened in future videos for healing from faith. In the meantime, though, I just want to go over some of the highlights of the things that happened. And before we get started with that, I just want to go ahead and say as well, bring out something positive before I jump into this, that he was a fantastic speaker. Great use of eye contact, gesture, anecdotes, and humor. He was fun to listen to, and I am glad that I went. As he began his lecture, he recounted how he got interested or began to start researching the historicity of Jesus. And in here, there are a couple of things that caught my attention and kind of made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, if you will. They were just a little bit unsettling. For instance, he referred to his agnostic wife and his atheism as being, quote, spiritually confused. I'm sure he did not mean for that to come across as slightly offensive. And of course, he was talking to a largely Christian audience. But I did find that a little bit offensive. Like, I'm not confused about anything. I'm not spiritually confused. I know exactly why I am not a Christian. I'm confused about what I classify as agnostic, atheist, whatever. But I'm not confused about why I'm not a Christian. And I kind of took offense to him using the phrase spiritually confused to describe him and his wife when they weren't Christians. Because it kind of implies, at least, that anybody who's not a Christian is merely spiritually confused. It's like saying, you're not gay, you're just confused. It's condescending, it's rude, and I didn't appreciate that. And this second one is kind of more or less just an observation. He talked about how before he was a Christian and when he was an atheist, he was a total jerk. Let's see, I wrote down an accurate description of all the things that he shared with us to convince us that he was a bad person before Christ, of course. Let's see. He said he was angry, drunk, narcissistic, self-destructive, and he scared his 2-year-old when he kicked holes in the walls. He also described himself as immoral. Now, to be fair, he never said that all atheists are this way. However, he didn't say that that wasn't the case either, and it does continue to imply or otherwise strengthen the assumption that one needs God in order to be a moral person. You can see the link to my video on how the moral argument fails, and that assuming that because there is a moral law, there is a moral lawgiver, and that also kind of wraps into the assumption that you need God in order to be moral. I can also say that my personal experience has not supported this, because I started out being a Christian, and now that I'm not a Christian, really nothing has changed. I still take in stray animals. I still have an overwhelming obsession with justice and honesty. I haven't had no homicidal or suicidal thoughts since becoming, I guess, an atheist, agnostic, whatever, not Christian, not nihilist or anything. I still have a reason to live, general purpose in life. My moral center, moral guidelines have not changed at all, neither have my interests. So either I wasn't a Christian to begin with, which would mean that I simply am not capable of being a Christian because I sure as hell did try, or not having God in my life has not affected my morality, which would further imply that maybe God is not necessary for morality. In any case, that's all the background stuff that's going through my head as I'm listening to him tell this story, because I know that there's been a study that says religious people and atheists in the US at least are equally likely to do nice things. Now then, his entire book rests on the hypothesis, I guess, argument that if Jesus and the resurrection can be proved, then all other religions are false. I'm going to leave that be, but the fatal flaw I have with his book and his research is not this argument that he's making. It's that he never proves to me that the standard of evidence is really enough to believe Christianity over the other religions. He never compares it against, say, the evidence for Romulus, who was a god, born of a virgin, performed miracles, was executed, rose again, visited some friends now that he's back from the dead, then ascended into heaven. Sounds eerily familiar, yet he never proves to me that the evidence found for Jesus is more overwhelming than the evidence for Romulus. So unless he can prove to me that the standard of evidence is greater than that any other claim can reach, it's not compelling enough for me. And honestly, and I need to point this out though, I have no vested interest either way. It doesn't matter to me whether Jesus lived or didn't live, or was who he said he was or not. Because none of the issues I have with Christianity rest on whether or not Jesus existed. Which is why I feel like I can keep a relatively open mind, because even if he did exist and was who he said he was, that would not change my mind on Christianity. Even with that, though, he did not convince me that Jesus existed and was who he said he was, and that the standard of evidence shows that he is the one truth. Now then, he gives us 4 E's, which is what he does in order to help people remember the evidences, I suppose. The first E is execution. And he reasons that in order to rise from the dead, you have to first be dead. I was really confused about why he started with this, because you have to exist in order to die. At least, that's what I would assume. So, starting here, we would have to presuppose Jesus' existence. That way he can die, that way he can rise again, that way the rest of the evidences make sense. I understand that he's going through things chronologically, which I guess would also be an easier way for people to remember them. But as far as persuasion goes, that was a really awkward place to start, and I probably would have done things backwards from the way that he did them. Which only goes to show that this was meant for Christians. It's meant for people who already believe in it. It's meant for confirmation bias, which supports an article I recently read and shared on my Facebook page, linked in the description, that apologetics is only for the people who already believe it, not actually for skeptics. And honestly, I kind of expected differently from this. I expected more of an academic discussion of sorts rather than confirmation bias. He goes on to depict how absolutely terrible the crucifixion was and how much it sucked, and then he makes a couple of claims that I'm really not sure about, such as the medical experts that he interviewed decided or declared that Jesus would have been suffering from shock from the loss of so much blood in the pre-crucifixion beating. I'm not sure why this matters in the whole scheme of trying to prove he exists or not. And I'm also not sure what symptoms they use to make this diagnosis, but if they're medical professionals and I'm not, this is not ranking high on my list. Things I need to know are true or not. Although I'm definitely keeping that in the list of things and I'm skeptical about. He also tells us that experts he interviewed said that the spear that was shoved into Jesus' side after he actually died on the cross, allegedly, according to the Bible, would have pierced his heart and lungs. He did not tell us how they came to that conclusion. If it was just based on the telling of it in the Bible, I'm not sure how they would have come to that. I would think there would have been too many variables to confidently say that the spear would have pierced his heart and lungs. So that's also going to be on my list of things I'm not so sure about. The next E is early accounts or reports of the resurrection. And here he tells us, I should say asserts, that it takes at least, a couple of centuries for myths to really take hold and wipe out the actual story, the actual evidence, historically what actually happened. And I say asserts because he didn't give any actual evidence of this. He just tells us that is so. And I don't really believe it. And actually neither does Dr. Richard Carrier, PhD in history, who wrote his book on the historicity of Jesus, Why We Might Have Reason to Doubt, linked in the description. I'm on page 100 of it. I told you about that in the update. And he says that there's actually the so-called founder of Rastafarianism, am I pronouncing that right? I'm not sure, I am not one, where myths started when he was alive and just got worse from there and were completely out of control 40 years after. So I don't really see where it needs to take, 2 centuries for myths to really take hold. And that is really the main driving force between assuming that early accounts or reports, in this case, mean truth. He also says that the first biography of Alexander the Great was written 400 years after his death, which, as far as I know, is true. And we assume that's true, so we believe that Alexander the Great existed. So why would we not believe that this account of Jesus' existence, death, and resurrection would point to his existence, because it was written so much closer to when these supposed events actually took place? Well, first of all, I think the standard of evidence should be higher for claims about Jesus' death, resurrection, existence, etc., considering how many people have been killed arguing about those statements already. Crusade, Spanish Inquisition, etc. So, I mean, if there's a religion I don't know about that has Alexander the Great as their god and they're committing genocide and starting wars and murdering people on the basis that this first biography of Alexander the Great is gospel and infallible, then I guess we could talk. Dr. Richard Carrier also disagrees with this, saying that they have more evidence for Alexander the Great used in the biography, that the historian who wrote the biography had A, no vested interest in whether or not Alexander the Great existed, B, cites his sources, not just said, oh, and 500 people saw him, or oh, and people said. He actually cites his sources. There are contemporary references to Alexander the Great when there are not for Jesus, at least not from people who were not a Christian and had a vested interest in him existing, etc. So there's better evidence for Alexander the Great than there is for Jesus. The third E is for empty tomb. And I have to admit, this is one of the things that makes me think, and that I'm going to consider as I continue my investigation into the historicity of Jesus, simply for curiosity's sake. Because like I said, it doesn't really matter to me which way, one way or the other. There's criterion of embarrassment and enemy attestation, which are the two most compelling arguments for the historicity of Jesus, in my personal opinion. The criterion for embarrassment saying that if the disciples made the whole thing up, they theoretically would not have said women were the first people to discover that Jesus had risen, because at the time women weren't even allowed to testify in court because they were considered to be unreliable witnesses, and so this would have hurt their case. So I'll be looking more into that later. And then enemy attestation being that in this account of the resurrection, when the Roman soldiers find out that Jesus' tomb was empty, they don't say, "Don't be ridiculous, of course his tomb's not empty, let's go look together. Oh, look, it's not empty." They say, or they start making excuses for why it might be empty, such as the disciples must have moved his body, which implicitly confirms that the tomb is empty. So that's something that I want to consider and look more into. And then lastly is the typical eyewitnesses. Say that there are 9 sources, most of which are biblical, for the existence, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And that's really basic. But this is where that fatal flaw I told you about comes in, because he makes the case that in legal research, since that's his background, in legal research and reporting, if you have 2 eyewitness sources saying the same thing, then it's as good as fact. So if we were to apply that standard of evidence to other death and resurrection claims, would that mean that there are 100 people who died and rose again that we're supposed to take as true? I'm not exactly sure how that would work. So there you have the basic outline of my experience with the lecture given by Lee Strobel on Case for Christ. Again, if you want to see the rest of my observations, you can see it in my blog, and I will have some future videos in the Healing from Faith series on a couple of the other things that I had to skip for the sake of time. So this is Firewalker. Thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Also be sure to rate, subscribe, share, etc. And I am looking forward to seeing you guys next time. I'm not sure which video is coming next because, like I said, I have 1,000,003 projects going on at the same time, all of which I'm pretty much equally excited about. But I should have another one up by the end of the weekend. And yeah, there you have it. Also be sure to check out my blog and Facebook page, because at least my Facebook page, if you're not on there, you're missing a lot of random stuff and articles that I post and share. And yeah, so do that. Anyways, happy almost Friday, everybody, and I will see you this weekend. Firewalker out.